Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant. I am Graham Juice Matthews, and today we kick off the SummerSlam review series for the summer of 2015. And that means from now until SummerSlam weekend, 69 days from now, I'm looking at my countdown as we speak, as I will be at SummerSlam, as many of you know. I'll be reviewing every installment of SummerSlam that I've yet to talk about, which does not include SummerSlam 1988. That's why today is a review of the 89 installment. I talked about SummerSlam 88 last year in WrestleRant 134 if you want to go back and check it out. I'll not be talking about SummerSlam 2002, 2008, 2011, and 2013. As I mentioned, I covered all 5 of those SummerSlam shows last year on WrestleRant, so go back in the archives, check those out before you listen to these reviews over the next 2 months. So, also that being said, going forward for the next 2 months anyway, WrestleRant videos will be uploaded on Tuesdays and Saturdays. I know it's usually Tuesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but I'm doing that because it's just the way that it worked out with the numbers. I scheduled everything out, like how many videos I would upload to do, how many videos I would need to upload a week in order to make the quota of, getting to the very last pay-per-view, SummerSlam 2014, before SummerSlam this year. I mapped everything out, and that's just the way it worked out. I believe I might upload 3 videos a week, later on this year, because believe it or not, I mapped out every WrestleRant edition from now until WrestleMania next year. So I already know what I'm going to be reviewing and watching over the next 9-10 months, which is pretty crazy, but I'm looking forward to it though. So I know at various points in the next year I'll be uploading 2 videos a week, sometimes 3 videos, back to 2, 3, whatever. It's basically however many pay-per-views I need to talk about before the current one comes up, the deadline, whatever. So it's going to switch around. So just a heads up, in the meantime, and from now until SummerSlam at least, I will be uploading 2 WrestleRant videos a week, one on Tuesday and one on Saturday. Also, just a brief heads up, much like the early WrestleMania reviews, which I talked about, my Road to WrestleMania video series from earlier this year, many of these early SummerSlam reviews will be brief. They will not be elongated. They won't be. I know, some pay-per-views I can rant on and on about for 20, 30, 40 minutes. I know my WrestleMania 27 review was 40 minutes long. That's because I know so much about them and because I've been a fan for them and so on and so forth. These early pay-per-views, I really don't know that much about. The only background that I know of these pay-per-views is stuff that I looked on Wikipedia on the SummerSlam page, and they told the viewers while watching this show on the WWE Network. And I could always look back and kind of freshen my mind on the storylines and stuff like that. And I do that from time to time if I'm interested in something, like what happened here, what was the motivation behind that feud or angle or match or whatever. Sometimes I just don't have the time to do it, unfortunately. But also, you as well. Maybe you watch this pay-per-view and you didn't watch it the first time and you're a newer fan like me. You weren't a fan during this period in time. So I'm also kind of going at it from the perspective that you haven't seen these pay-per-views either. If you were a fan during these times, I apologize for my ignorance. But just gotta stick with me for these early SummerSlam reviews. I'm just going to be commenting and reviewing my thoughts on the quality of each match, the outlook of the feuds, my enjoyment of it, etc., etc. So just bear that in mind while listening through these early SummerSlam reviews, this 89 installment and a few of the 90s installments as well. So we kick off the show, a 6-man tag team matchup, or just a tag team matchup. No tag team titles on the line. The Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard taking on the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart. Now, I really enjoyed this matchup. You had Bobby Heenan in the corner of the Brainbusters, and no one in the corner of the Hart Foundation. So the Hart Foundation were at a distinct disadvantage here because they had a distraction. The Brainbusters, they had a distraction in their corner in the form of Bobby Heenan, who ultimately played a factor in the finish, and the Brainbusters picking up the victory. The Brainbusters were, if you're a wrestling purist, you're going to love these guys. One half of the 4 Horsemen, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson coming over to the WWE, WWF, whatever, as the Brainbusters. A very underrated tag team, I feel like. I know I've heard the team, the Brainbusters before, but I just don't know that much about them until I saw this pay-per-view. They're great workers. You already know the legacy and the legend of the 4 Horsemen, but just being able to kind of see them live and I think maybe work for the first time. I don't know if any of the early WrestleMania reviews, or the early WrestleManias that I reviewed had these guys on the card. But it was cool to see them in action. The Hart Foundation, what more can be said? One of the greatest tag teams of all time, putting together a very well wrestled and solid tag team match, a very solid put together tag team matchup that I very much enjoyed. Now, I said before in my early 90s reviews of WrestleMania and stuff that for me, the highlights of each of these shows for like the first 5 or 6 WrestleManias were the tag team matches. Like more often than not, they had nothing on the line. There were only one set of tag team titles, which were not on the line in this matchup. And then you had the rest of the matches were just based off of personal feuds. And it really goes to show how strong the tag team division, how strong the state of the tag team division was at that period in time in the mid-80s, early 90s, in WWF, and just wrestling in general. So I really enjoyed these tag team matches. I thought this was a great way of kicking off the show. As I mentioned before, the Brainbusters picking up the victory. And if you're a fan of tag team wrestling, you're going to enjoy this match and most of the show as well. We had a few other 6-man tag team matches throughout the night. Up next, we had Dusty Rhodes taking on the Honky Tonk Man. Now, of course, I watched this pay-per-view maybe 2 days removed, I believe, just this past weekend. So, fresh off the passing, on the very unfortunate passing of Dusty Rhodes. So, kind of hit hard and hit home to watch him on this pay-per-view, kind of working his magic backstage. Another great, promo per usual from Dusty Rhodes coming out and working a fun match with the Honky Tonk Man, who's a fun gimmick. I don't know if I would call him underrated specifically, but I enjoyed his character for what it was, and I always thought he was always, a riot for the most part. I thought he was a great character. But, yeah, these guys work in a pretty nice tag team match, and although it was a nice tag team match, I think I enjoyed it more than I probably would have a couple weeks ago. Just seeing Dusty Rhodes in action, after his passing this past Thursday was kind of heartbreaking to see, but really kind of reminded you of the greatness that was Dusty Rhodes, cutting a great promo beforehand. And just, ridiculous. He's coming out in some ridiculous attire and then wearing the policeman hat, all that other kind of stuff, and all the wacky stints, the wacky stuff that Vince had this guy do during his time in the WWE was way over the top compared to what he did in the territories and stuff like that in WCW and NWA and what else. But he made it work. He had a great theme song. Just hearing that song hit the arena and he comes out, the people go crazy for him. He was so popular during the 80s in the WWE. And, really made the most of a shitty gimmick. And not a shitty gimmick, but son of a plumber, no pun intended. But as compared to what he was doing, the legacy that he left behind in the territories, to come over to WWE and for them to make fun of him and kind of mock him, that's basically what the prime intention was of making him the American Dream, doing all these silly vignettes. He made it work and he got himself over. So props to Dusty Rhodes, and like I said, fun watching him in action against the Honky Tonk Man on this show. Up next, we had Mr. Perfect versus the Red Rooster, a glorified squash match. I'm surprised it went 3 minutes. It felt like it was a minute long. I just remember watching this match and it was like, oh wow, it's over already. I mean, in retrospect, I really should not have been surprised. It was the Red Rooster, of all people, Terry Taylor, who's a very good worker, but much like Dusty Rhodes, but to a much larger extent, was saddled with a very shitty gimmick. Why they ever thought that would get over, I have no idea. But this is the 80s, the cartoon era, whatever. But Mr. Perfect, I've always been a huge fan of it. I don't know, I've seen so many matches of his from WrestleMania and whatnot, but just on this show, I don't know, just seeing his face he looked so much like his son, Curtis Axel, Michael McGillicuddy, Joe Hennig, whatever you want to call him. The resemblance between those two is just simply uncanny. It's crazy. But pretty simple and effective squash from Mr. Perfect. I think he cut a promo early on, or later on in the show, backstage, but that served a purpose in giving Mr. Perfect a clean, easy win. Up next in 6-person tag team action, we had Rick Martel and the fabulous Rougeau brothers taking on Tito Santana and the Rockers. Again, a very fun tag team match. I'm not all that familiar with the fabulous Rougeau brothers, but, and watching them on Countdown and various documentaries and watching some old matches of theirs and just hearing people talk about them, they were a pretty fun act, especially for the 80s. I mean, in a cartoon era, these guys were pretty funny. I think a gimmick like theirs would probably get over in the year of 2015 as well, and I truly mean that. I think these guys were great. I thought these guys were great, and I thought their theme music was even funnier. Just a very catchy tune, and I just remember it might have been Countdown where they were making fun of it or whatever. I thought that was good. Rick Martel was always a great gimmick as well, and Tito Santana, an excellent wrestler. You combine him with the Rockers, and you have yourself a pretty well-wrestled match. Nothing that was like over-the-top amazing, but that's just pretty much the one word that you can use to sum up the show in a nutshell. Just fun. I enjoyed these matches. They were fun, entertaining, in-ring action contests that I very much enjoyed. I mean, there wasn't much on the line in many of these matches, but for the biggest blockbuster of the summer, I enjoyed it for what it was, and I thought it was very good. So, Rick Martel and the fabulous Rougeau brothers emerging victorious with Jimmy Hart in their corner. Of course, Jimmy Hart pulling double duty after he was in the corner of the Honky Tonk Man earlier on. Up next, my personal favorite match of the night, for obvious reasons, the Ultimate Warrior is involved and contending for the Intercontinental Championship against Rick Rude, with Bobby Heenan in his corner, of course. So, of course, it was 1 year prior that the Ultimate Warrior won the Intercontinental Championship at SummerSlam in a record-setting, 90 seconds or whatever it was, a minute and a half, even if that, against the Honky Tonk Man, ending the longest reigning reign in the history of the Intercontinental Championship. So 1 year later, because remember at WrestleMania, Rick Rude beat the Ultimate Warrior for that Intercontinental Championship. Warrior was in chase mode going into SummerSlam and regained the gold on this show. Again, not an amazing match. I thought Warrior's matches with Hogan and Savage were a lot better because they told a better story and they were just much more iconic, and they happened at WrestleMania. Warrior didn't have many great matches during his run. I owned the Warrior compilation DVD of his best matches, or Warrior's greatest matches, whatever, that came out last year. Not the Always Believe DVD. I have that too, but the greatest matches DVD came out last year. And most of the matches on that DVD are a majority of those matches are just squash matches, because it's mostly what Warrior competed in during his various stints in WWE. He had the iconic matches against Hogan and Savage and Rick Rude and a few others. But other than that, though, he usually more often than not wrestled in squash matches. So, I would call this one of Warrior's best matches, but that just kind of goes without saying. But still, a good match, though. I thought it was good. Rick Rude, who I thought was an excellent worker and easily one of the most underrated talents of all time. Should he have been a world champion? I think so, but the fact the guy is not in the WWE Hall of Fame yet, I'll never know. I know he's passed away, but maybe it's because he, quote-unquote, turned his back on WWE back in the mid-90s when he jumped over to WCW 20 years ago. I have no idea, but I think it's long overdue that he's ready to go in for a WWE Hall of Fame induction. But I've ranted on and on about that in the past. I enjoyed this matchup. Ultimate Warrior coming up victorious, pinning Rick Rude to win back the Intercontinental Championship to a huge pop from the crowd. They go crazy. The interviewer was on site in the crowd, just trying. I don't know if he was trying to interview someone, just getting the reaction from the fans. How often do you see that nowadays? If something crazy like that happens, Dean Ambrose is the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion. How often do you see a Michael Cole or Tom Phillips or Renee Young standing in the crowd? Surely they'll have interviews with, people in the back, sometimes in the ring, which is kind of a throwback to the past, which is cool. But I wish we would go back to these little not nuances, but the little things like this, and where you see an interviewer in the crowd getting a reaction from a fan, or just kind of grabbing the atmosphere of the audience when something electric like this happens. You never see that nowadays. It's one of the small things that makes a huge difference. I don't know where they stopped doing it, or maybe something happened. The fans now, I don't know if most of those interviews back in the day were a shoot or they were worked or whatever. I don't know, whatever you want to call them. Maybe they just ran into issues along the way and fans weren't, going along with it, and maybe they'll grab the mic and say, Chris Benoit for the Hall of Fame, something dumb like that. I have no idea. But just something as small as this, where you have an interviewer in the crowd capturing the overall feel of the event that's going on, it makes you feel like you're there. That's like the little things like that make me appreciate the 80s and the 90s, which we don't really, there's little things that we don't really get anymore, which would be cool if they went back to. Don't expect it, but that's what makes me makes me appreciate the past and matches and monumental moments like this one. Up next, another six-man tag team matchup. Jim Duggan teaming with Demolition to take on Andre the Giant and the Twin Towers. Not as good as the earlier matchup. Definitely didn't go as long. It was a lot shorter. It was only like about 7.5 minutes, whereas the other one was almost 15 minutes. It was okay for what it was. I enjoyed the combo of Jim Duggan and Demolition. Demolition is another team that's long overdue for a WWE Hall of Fame induction. Jim Duggan, I just met him a week ago at Legends of Wrestling. Really cool guy, so great to see him in action on this show. And he came out wearing the Demolition mask, so they all matched, and they did an interview before the matchup. And then when they got to the ring, Duggan took off the Demolition mask, and he had Demolition face paint, but it was red, white, and blue like the flag. And it was great. I really enjoyed that. They were a fun trio. The Twin Towers were good. Big Boss Man and Akeem, which is crazy. I think Akeem was Earthquake, wasn't he? I forgot who he was before he was Akeem. Just a terrible gimmick. The Big Boss Man, just funny to see him, 10 years before he would become the bodyguard for the corporation and the Ministry of Darkness or whatever. Just complete role reversal from 10 years later. And then there was Andre the Giant, who I didn't mind seeing here, but at this point, he was still an attraction. People were like, "Oh, it's Andre the Giant. He's 7 feet tall, whatever." But he was. I don't know if he was extremely overexposed by this point, or the luster just kind of faded away, or whatever. But he even had trouble walking to the ring. I mean, this is 1989. I think he passed away in 93, and he was done in wrestling maybe in 90 or 91. So, I mean, this was kind of towards the end of his run in WWE. And, it's kind of just painful to see him walk around, much like the Great Khali, who was not nearly in as much pain as Andre was at this period in time. But just kind of see him limited. I mean, he was limited throughout most of the matchup, but just to see him walk to the ring was kind of heartbreaking to see. But still, a decent match, not as good as the other 6-man tag team match, but still fun for what it was. Jim Duggan and Demolition picking up the victory there. Up next, Greg the Hammer Valentine taking on Hercules, where we had a special guest referee whose name escapes me. I'm going to look at the thing right here. Ron Garvin. He was the special guest referee. I don't know where he came from. I thought he might have been a celebrity. This is one of the things from this show that I did look up. He was from some other territory. I think he was in WCW or NWA at one point. Came over to the WWE. He was at WrestleMania that year in 1989. I don't know I think he faced Mr. Perfect or something like that. I can't remember. I watched that WrestleMania so long ago. I just remember reading in his bio page or whatever. But he served as a special guest referee on this show when it looked like Greg the Hammer Valentine with Jimmy Hart was in his corner. Greg the Hammer Valentine almost picked up the victory, but with, I think Hercules reversed it or something like that, and the referee caught on to it. Hercules almost ended up picking up the victory, and he came close, but no cigar. Valentine won the match, and I think maybe he missed it, or something happened with the referee. I can't even I only watched this 2 days ago, and I already forgot. I apologize. But something happened where he didn't catch Greg the Hammer Valentine cheating to win, and he picked up the victory. And I think they got physical after the matchup, him and Hercules. Or Roddy Piper ended up coming down, and him and the referee, I think, or him and Hercules ended up laying out Greg the Hammer Valentine, and Roddy Piper making his grand return on the show and cutting a promo afterwards, which was pretty entertaining to hear, as usual from the Scottish superstar, from Roddy Piper, from the rowdy one, Roddy Piper. That's what I was going for. But decent match for what it was. It only lasted 3 minutes, but the stuff with the referee, I mean, it was kind of overbooked in a sense with all the interference from Jimmy Hart and the referee and then Roddy Piper. But it was well worth it for the return of Piper alone. Up next, Ted DiBiase taking on Jimmy Snuka. I honestly do not remember much about this match at all, and I have no idea why. I mean, it went 7 minutes. I'm surprised. I can't even recall this matchup. I mean, I'm sure it was good. I don't remember anything being terrible about it, but I can hardly remember anything. DiBiase won, but that was it. I'm sure it didn't really have much of a meaning. He won via countout. Snuka didn't make it back into the ring in time, and Virgil was in his corner. And I think he laid out Virgil after the matchup or something, but I just don't remember much about this match. It's very forgettable to say the least, but I'm sure it was decent. It couldn't have been terrible, otherwise I would have remembered it, but really not much to note there other than Ted DiBiase picked up the victory, and I'm pretty sure Virgil got roughed up afterwards if my memory serves me correctly. And then we get to the main event. Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake taking on Randy Savage and Zeus. So if it seems like a kind of a random matchup, it was to an extent, although there was somewhat of a purpose behind it. It was all in promotion for No Holds Barred, which came out that summer, I think. And then Zeus came out on Saturday night's main event, triggered a feud with Hogan right before the release. Because I know when they showed the flashback of when Zeus, I think Hogan was going to the ring for some cage match, probably against Savage. And Zeus was standing on the ring steps, stopping him from getting in. Hogan started to attack him. Zeus no-sold the offense and barely kicked him. And Hogan it was bad. It looked pretty bad. Zeus was no wrestler. I understood why they did it, but if they try to do something like that in this day and age, it wouldn't fly at all. They try to tie in. Actually, they did do it this day and age with Kane and See No Evil. They actually did do that about 20 years later, so I should not be surprised by WWE, but not that much to this extent where they believed that the character in the movie was the same as they were in real life. And that's why they kind of went off the feed between Zeus and Hogan. But going back to what I was saying before, when they showed that flashback of the two encountering each other on that episode, I believe, of Saturday night's main event, it showed May 1989. And I know the movie came out on my birthday. I remember reading about that on my birthday a couple weeks ago, June 2nd. So that was right before the movie came out in theaters, I believe. And then they kind of furthered the feud over the next couple of weeks. Randy Savage enlisted the assistance of Zeus, and this was right after Savage had wrapped up his feud somewhat. I mean, at WrestleMania, not really. I mean, if they were facing each other on this show, but he had just had that match with Hogan at WrestleMania 5 where he lost the WWE title to him. So Hogan, of course, enlisting the help of none other than Brutus Beefcake, of all people, to team with him on this show to take on Savage and Zeus. A very random pairing. I know Beefcake and Hogan were real-life buddies, so that it's not really that much of a surprise. And that's really the only reason why Beefcake ended up getting a push in WWE. He wasn't a terrible worker, but for a guy that ended up getting the gimmick of the barber, it was a goofy gimmick. I know that was the 80s, but nothing about that guy screamed main event talent. I ranted on about that in my WrestleMania reviews, but I don't want to say he was overrated. I just know why he got the push. I just don't necessarily agree with it, because he wasn't really that great. He was a fun gimmick. It was fine for like an undercard kind of thing, but main event of SummerSlam, come on. You know, when you're in there with Hogan and Savage, I mean, he felt a little out of place. At least Zeus was there for the movie. He was terrible, but at least he was there for the movie. Of course, this match was not that good when you had the involvement of Zeus. When you had Savage in there doing most of the in-ring work for pretty much everyone in the match, it was good. But when Zeus was in there, it was very limited. Your basic story of Hogan trying to overcome the odds. He ultimately power slammed him, delivered the leg drop, and picked up the win. So a pretty predictable story, as every Hogan feud was back in the late 80s and early 90s. But still, I mean, like I said before, Savage carried most of the matchup from an in-ring work standpoint, and then Beefcake just fell out of place as all hell. Miss Elizabeth in the corner of Hogan and Beefcake, coming out to their assistance right before the match started, to their aid, I should say, standing in their corner throughout the matchup, so that was a nice little touch. The match was really not that good, kind of brought back memories of the main event of WrestleMania 1, which was not well wrestled at all. It was not a good match when you had Mr. T in there and Paul Orndorff, Rowdy Piper, and Hulk Hogan. Wasn't at all a good match, but it was fun for what it was. Designed for comedy, that's what this one was meant to be as well. It was not supposed to be taken seriously. Without Savage, this would have been a complete and total disaster if it wasn't already. But I understood why they did it. They wanted to promote the movie. I get that. It wasn't a great match, but I understood why they did it. But it did make for a fun main event nevertheless. Even though it was not the best wrestled match in the world, it was okay for what it was, because I understood what they were trying to go for. So on the whole, I really enjoyed the show. Like I said, I mean, I didn't really understand. It's not that I didn't understand. I just didn't know the background for many of the matches. But that didn't take away from my enjoyment of it at all. I thought it was a very fun show. A lot of the in-ring matches were good, especially the tag team matches, not the main event. But the 2 6-man tag team matches were good. Really enjoyed the opener between the Brainbusters and the Hart Foundation. Warrior and Rude, to me, was my favorite match of the night. Not necessarily the best match of the night, but it was my favorite. As I'm a huge Warrior mark, and I thought that was, I enjoyed that. But yeah, all in all, I thought it was a good show. Furthered some feuds, promoted no holds barred. Whether that was a good thing or bad thing is up to you to decide. But yeah, it was a fun night of action. That's basically, what SummerSlam should be. The epitome of SummerSlam, everything that it should be, is a fun summer blockbuster. The biggest party of the summer, as WWE bills it as. And that's exactly what this felt like. I mean, you can argue whether it was a great show, an entertaining show, which in my mind are two very different things. I thought it was definitely the latter. I don't know if I would call it a great show, but I definitely enjoyed it through and through, and I thought it was a very good stuff. And it really, it was very good, and very good stuff from start to finish. But it definitely captured that feel that it was the biggest party of the summer. So I think that's what I liked most about it, and that's kind of what went away from SummerSlam for a while. I mean, I'm going to a full SummerSlam review here I'm pretty much summarizing every SummerSlam in like 2 seconds here, but there was a time in maybe like the late 90s or probably the early 2000s or mid 2000s where SummerSlam did not feel like the second WrestleMania of the year. It just kind of felt like any other pay-per-view. Always a good pay-per-view, just never truly great. And it wasn't until, I would say, 2011 where they finally captured that feel with, once again, with Punk and Cena. And the next year, Brock and Triple H for the first time, 2013, with Lesnar and Punk. And last year, Lesnar and Cena, and all these other great matches they've done over the years at these various SummerSlams. But, I thought this was everything that SummerSlam should be, and I'm looking forward to watching more SummerSlam reviews going forward. So as I mentioned at the start of this review, you can check out my review of SummerSlam 1988, the inaugural installment from last summer, that I reviewed it last summer. It didn't air last summer, of course. SummerSlam 1988, WrestleRant edition 134. Type that in right on the channel or on the YouTube search bar or whatever you want to do. You can find that video, listen to that review. I believe it's around 20 minutes long. And and I'll be back on Saturday with my review of SummerSlam 1990. But in the meantime, and in between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Have a great week, guys, and I'll be back here on Saturday, as I mentioned before, with my review of SummerSlam 1990. Catch you guys then.